faith, determination, and a positive attitude. It'll take you further than ability every time. Let's talk about it. Hi, Joe McClain here from CatholicHack.com. I'm in Buffalo, New York. I just spoke at the Catholic Men's Conference here. I'm super excited. I think it went really well.
How many of you are going to pray with your family every single night? Oopsies. I would jump down there, but I would lose so much weight that I'd have to make it up with chocolate. You can't maintain this level of awesomeness that easy.
Tonight, I'll be speaking at a parish, but I told the story of Sergeant Roy Benavidez, a personal hero of mine, a man that I got to meet when I was a kid. You know, just somebody who was like larger than life. Talk about faith, determination, and a positive attitude. We live in a world that makes you think you gotta have things. You gotta be the smartest, the fastest, the best looking, this, that, or the other thing. Roy Benavidez was the kind of a guy who knew what faith, determination, and a positive attitude would do for him. It would give him an advantage. You know, hustle is something every human being, no matter who they are, no matter their circumstances, has at their disposal. Hard work, determination, positive attitude, and faith. In 1965, Roy was leading a patrol of South Vietnamese soldiers, and he stepped on a landmine. He was medevaced all the way back to San Antonio, where he was told he would never walk again. I mean, could you imagine being told you're in a hospital bed, you're paralyzed from the waist down, sorry, you're never going to walk again? Roy struggled. He struggled. He was really in a bad place with that. He would wheel down to the chapel and he would just have these arguments with God. And, you know, he would be like, I don't get it. What am I supposed to do now? I'm a crippled. I'm going to be a burden on my family. What do I do now? And then, like a grace from heaven, he heard the words ringing in his ears. It wasn't the voice of God. It was the voice of his drill instructor back in airborne school. Benavidez, winners never quit and quitters never win. Which are you? I'm a winner, sir. Roy became emboldened to really do something about his situation, to not give up, to be resilient, to never quit, to have faith, determination, and a positive attitude. That night, when they put him to bed, Roy flopped himself out of bed, hit the floor, and he started to crawl towards that wall. Just in agonizing pain, tears streaming down his face. Every single night he would crawl towards that wall, no matter how many times they caught him, no matter how many times they hauled him back to bed and gave him a sleeping pill. He would get out of that bed and he would crawl towards that wall, just using his chin and his elbows. And he would get to the wall, force himself up, and just wiggle his toes left and right. Because faith, determination, and a positive attitude will take you further than ability every time. He didn't quit. In fact, Roy walked out of that hospital some months later. In fact, Roy went on to run 10 to 15 miles a day and jump out of airplanes again. In fact, Roy went back to Vietnam in 1968 because quitters never win and winners never quit. In 1968, May 2nd, 1968, Roy was coming out of the barracks on his way to the chow hall with a bottle of Tabasco sauce in his hand. And he saw a priest offering mass on the back end of a Jeep, and he went to mass because Roy was an incredible Catholic and he knew that faith in God is what carried him through life. So after Mass, he's on his way to the chow hall, Tabasco sauce, when he hears the call for help. There are 12 men caught behind enemy lines, deep within Cambodia, surrounded by the enemy, taking fire. Every man wounded or killed, even by that point. Roy ran to the flight line in hopes of doing something, to making a difference, and to try to save these men's lives. There was a helicopter coming back and a failed attempt to rescue those guys. All shot up. The door gunner, 19-year-old Michael Craig, fell into Roy's arms. His last words were, "My God, my mother and father." And then he died. Roy jumped on a helicopter heading back with nothing but his bottle of Tabasco sauce, his K-bar knife, and a first aid kit. They get to the scene. It's so incredibly dangerous. I mean, there's so much fire going on. There's so many bullets flying through the air that they couldn't even get close. So Roy told them to get as close as they could and to let him out of the helicopter. Roy stood in the doorway of the helicopter and he made the sign of the cross and he just jumped into the jungle. Could you imagine? No weapon. He didn't bring a rifle with him. He brought his bottle of Tabasco sauce, the K-bar, and a first aid kit. And he jumps into the jungle. He has to run 75 to 100 yards just to meet the men where they're at. Completely surrounded. They're out in the middle of this grassy field. And in the tree line were all the enemy soldiers and just hundreds of muzzle flashes coming right at them. Bullets flying everywhere. Roy didn't make it. He was shot 3 times before he even got there. He didn't stop because faith, determination, and a positive attitude will carry you further than ability every time. And winners never quit and quitters never win. Roy makes it to the men. He sets up a defensive perimeter. He gives them ammunition. He gives them a will to fight, a will to survive. He bandages their wounds. He calls in air support and tries to get another chopper in there. The other chopper comes in. He pops smoke. He's carrying bodies and putting them into the helicopter, carrying the wounded. While he's still being wounded, shrapnel is embedded into his face and his head by this point from all the grenade fire, RPG fire, bullets flying everywhere. He is incredibly wounded and bleeding himself, and he's carrying these men into the helicopter. The pilot gets shot and killed. The helicopter crashes. Roy is shot through the back. Bullet comes out through the armpit, and he passes out. He gets up a couple of minutes later. He makes his way to the crashed helicopter. He pulls the men out, sets up a defensive perimeter, and begins to fight, begins to render aid, and encourages the men to keep fighting for survival. Can you imagine? I mean, the only thing I'm going to worry about today is whether or not my coffee is hot enough. You know what I'm saying? Roy calls in another helicopter. The other helicopter shows up. NVA soldiers are coming out of the woodworks, just crawling all over the thing like ants. The pilot has to take off and shake them off, in fact. They're shooting into the helicopter, bayoneting the pilot through the window. I mean, it's pretty bad. Roy is just putting more men onto this thing. It was so overloaded. I mean, it was so heavy, this helicopter, that the pilot feared they'd never even get off the ground. And blood was just flowing like a water faucet out of that helicopter. There were so many dead or wounded. The NVA soldiers were attacking Roy in hand-to-hand combat, bashing his head with the butt of their rifle, bashing the jaw and breaking his teeth, stabbing his arms. In fact, they nearly severed off his left arm. They cut the right one to the bone in an attempt to kill him, but Roy survived because faith, determination, and a positive attitude will take you further than ability every time. Winners never quit, and quitters never win. By the time they pulled Roy off that battlefield because he would never quit, Roy was holding his own intestines in his hand. When they made it back to the base, by the grace of God, after a 6-hour ordeal, they thought Roy was dead. In fact, Roy threw so many bodies onto that helicopter that he threw 3 dead enemy bodies onto that helicopter because he didn't want to leave anybody behind, and he was just throwing and tossing bodies. Well, the doctor who met that helicopter thought Roy was one of those dead enemy bodies because he was so mutilated, he was unrecognizable. He wasn't moving. His heart rate had slowed. His jaw was broken and locked in place. His teeth were smashed. His eyes were closed shut because of the blood and the wounds. And they put him in a body bag and they started to zip up that body bag. Could you even imagine what that must have sounded like? The sound of that zipper coming up like that. Roy spit in that doctor's face and it saved his life. They medevaced him back to Houston. He would spend over a year in the hospital, but he survived. And he went on to finish his military career. I met this man when I was a teenager, and he was larger than life to me. Faith, determination, and a positive attitude will carry you further than ability every time. You don't have to be the smartest, the best looking. You don't have to have the best equipment. You got to be determined. You got to have faith in God. And you got to follow the one thing He has for your life. And when you do that, and you never give up, because quitters never win, and winners never quit, which are you? May God bless you.